of the groups I'm going to be talking about here. Okay. Okay, again, I have no commercial affiliation with any of the groups I'm going to be talking about or mentioning, or you'll be seeing in the slideshow. It's simply because those are the groups that I go with most frequently to Guadalupe. And so we'll be talking about the great white shark. And let me make sure there we go. Everything seems to be, there we go. So we're talking about the great white shark, which is one of the iconic animals of the marine world. And we'll be talking about it from a biological point of view, as well as an actual diving point of view. So about my experience, I have spent a lot of time in the water doing cage dive. Trips to Gans Bay, South Africa, where I've done a lot of cage dives there with the great whites. I've done 22 trips to Guadalupe Island, Mexico over the last number of years. Started going there, first of all, in 2008. And right now I'm scheduled for 2 more trips this year. So I've done at least 2 trips every year for all those years. That accounts for about 70 days of great white shark cage diving, and well over 400 cage dives that I've done. And I try to do as many as I possibly can when I'm out there, because once I've done it, I realized it's something I wanted to continue to do. And I've probably seen hundreds of individual great white sharks during those cage dive trips. And for anybody who knows about the photographs I take, once I'm in the water, my finger is always on the shutter release. And on actually an average day, I'll probably take 1,000 images of sharks during the time that I'm out there. Well, sharks have been with us for a long time, been with us for well over 420 million years. And the one that we talk about most often is the megalodon. And the megalodon was 60 feet long or longer. And when you look at the terrifying shark or terrifying animal that happened to be on land, we've got the Tyrannosaurus, which was only a mere 40 feet long and probably would have been a nice snack for the megalodon. And there are people, of course, who say that the megalodon still exists, that it's still out there in the ocean. And if we ever would run across one, this would be the basic size comparison. And hopefully we'll never have that happen. But what we have now is the distant relative of the megalodon, which is certainly a very, very impressive fish. And when you see it, of course, you're going to realize its grace and beauty in the water. And it's not necessarily the terrifying animal that a lot of people think. In 1971, the diving community saw the first film that actually had footage of a great white shark taken underwater. It was taken by Peter Gimbel and Carl Rossler and a number of others. Stan Waterman took underwater video and underwater photographs of great white sharks actually feeding in the water. And that was something that was revolutionary in the diving world. And we had an opportunity to actually see that animal live and in action underwater. And then in 1975, everything changed. Peter Gimbel wrote the book Jaws, and the movie came out, and that changed just about everyone's perception. In fact, there were probably some people who didn't even want to take a bath. So what is it, fear or fascination as far as sharks are concerned? Well, in 1975, I was an active scuba instructor. I was actually teaching scuba at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And I found a significant increase in people who wanted to take our scuba course after the movie Jaws came out, which was kind of a surprise to me because I thought it might scare people away. It did frighten some people, and the industry feels it did have a negative impact on the sport, but it was just the opposite for us. In fact, actually, we used to play the movie Jaws when we did some sort of a display or promotional program, either at the university or at a boat show or something else. And it seemed to draw people to the sport in some ways who wanted to actually be in the water and see a shark, not necessarily a great white, but any shark, to kind of maybe get over that fear. But it did cause some fascination for people. Well, there is something, a technical term for fear of sharks. It's galeophobia, and it is the excessive and persistent fear of sharks of any kind. And that term actually is derived from two Greek words, galos, which means a shark with markings resembling those on a weasel, which is kind of bizarre, and phobos, which means fear. So there are some people who do have that unreasoning fear of sharks. And there are others, of course, that are drawn to them and want to see them as often as they possibly can. So we're going to talk about fear versus reality. So, of course, when there is a shark attack anywhere, it makes headlines. It's big news. It's big news on all of the channels. It's big news in the news media because people want to make you believe or appear to believe that sharks are dangerous because as soon as you go in the water, they're there to attack you and eat you. But in reality, they're far down the list. In reality, the number one deadliest animal is a mosquito. It kills over 1 million people each year worldwide. The number two animal is a hippopotamus. And you don't very rarely anyway, see something on the news media about people being attacked or killed by hippos, but they kill about 2,900 people a year in Africa alone. Crocodiles, they account for about 800 people who are killed every year. Elephants kill about 500 people every year. The African lion kills hundreds of people every year. Some of those are unreported because some are very isolated in Africa. The number six, would be Cape buffalo, was a very dangerous animal, kills over 200 people a year. The Australian box jellyfish causes over 100 deaths per year. The grizzly bear accounts for about 90 deaths per year. And I live in grizzly country. I live in the state of Idaho. In fact, I'm looking out my window now and I can see the Rocky Mountains, the Tetons in front of the house. And we see bears all the time. And there are people who are attacked by bears. Most often is because of the fact that they want to take a selfie, believe it or not, with an animal like a grizzly bear. But they're dangerous animals. And of course, they do account for some deaths. And so then you have the great white way down the list that account for 6 to maybe up to 10 people every year. And so they're not the mindless killing machine or mindless eating machine that the news media would lead us to believe. But of course, Hollywood wants us to believe the exact opposite. They want us to believe that sharks are even falling out of the sky. So Sharknado was a very popular movie, and there actually have been 4 of them. So people can't get enough of the fact that sharks are coming out of the sky and eating people at every opportunity. And then when you look at other movies, you've got other ridiculous movies like Jaws of the Mississippi, Two-Headed Shark, Three-Headed Shark, Sharkenstein, Sky Shark, Tsunami Sharks. You have things like Super Shark, the Shark Exorcist, Ghost Shark. You've got the Atomic Shark, Santa Jaws, Snow Sharks, Avalanche Sharks. And when you look at that, it looks like their primary prey are young, bikini-clad blonde women, because that's what's on the cover of all of these things. So they would like you to believe that sharks are eating people at all opportunities. And of course, we know that's ridiculous. And of course, even more ridiculous are how they're sometimes portrayed, again, in movies.
Mr. Powers, you'll notice that all the sharks have laser beams attached to their heads. I figure every creature deserves a warm meal.
Dr. Evil, it's about the sharks. When you were frozen, they were put on the endangered species list. We tried to get some, but it would have taken months to clear up the red tape.
You know, I have one simple request, and that is to have sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
And considering and actually continuing on with the ridiculous attitude about sharks, Shark Week was really very good when it first started, but last year they had Mike Tyson versus the great white shark. And so they start doing these really novel and sometimes really ridiculous things that really take away from our understanding of the beauty and grace and importance of great white sharks. And there is something that actually came from this called jumping the shark. It's when a television series or a movie reaches a point at which far-fetched events are included merely for the sake of novelty and indicative of the decline in quality of that particular television program or the movie. And in fact, it came from a Happy Days episode in 1977 when the Fonz actually was water skiing and jumped over a tiger shark. And so that led to the fact that that program was just about at its end and come up with the phrase jumping the shark. So sharks are beautiful, as we talked about. Sharks are a very important part of the ecosystem and a necessary part of the ecosystem. And so let's talk a little bit about shark anatomy, and this is the anatomy of the great white. Of course, you know the dorsal fin and the caudal fin. Those are the things you generally see at the surface. Now, most often in a movie, you'll see in the movie only the dorsal fin. In reality, a shark, especially one like the great white, has a large, a kind of semi-lunate caudal fin. And so you'll see that at the same time you'll see the dorsal fin. The pectoral fins, which of course you're using for their attitude in the water. You have the pelvic fin, and on males, you have a modified or extension of the pelvic fin where you have claspers that are used for mating. You have a keel that helps, of course, with their stabilization in the water. Great whites have 5 gill slits, and their nostrils, of course, where they can actually sense the water or taste the water. And pilot fish, which are not part of the shark, but a lot of times that they're in the front of the shark, they're actually there to feed on the scraps left over from the shark is feeding. So the scientific name of the great white is Cacardon cacarius, and it's derived from the Greek term for sharpened teeth. And common names, of course, would be the great white shark, the white pointer, or white death. Now, one thing about the photos that you're going to see, the majority of the photos that I'm going to show you are photos that I've taken myself. And there are some that I have gotten from other people, but the majority I've taken myself on some of these trips. Now, great whites, of course, are known for their size. I mean, they are huge fish, an average size being about 15 feet or 4.5 meters. Mature sharks can be 21 feet or 6.4 meters or longer. In fact, there is one that people talk about, which is Big Blue, that was supposed to be one of the largest sharks in the world. That's over 20 feet. On one of the trips to Guadalupe, I was standing on the back deck with Leslie Leaney of the Historical Diving Society at the end of one of the dive days. And this huge, gigantic dorsal fin surfaced, came right to the back of the boat. It turned on its side and swam along the side of the boat, made a big circle and did it a couple of times. And we estimated that shark to be well over 20 feet long. Mature sharks can be 7,000 pounds or heavier, which is a gigantic fish. The largest fish ever, largest great white ever caught on hook and line was actually caught in Cuba in the 1940s, and it was 21 feet long and weighed well over 7,000 pounds. So the great white, even though it is large, and there are some very large ones out there, is not the largest of the living sharks. The largest living sharks are things, for example, like the megamouth, which is the 3rd largest living shark at about 18 feet. The basking shark is the 2nd largest living shark at about 24 feet. And the whale shark is the largest of its sharks, and it's 30 feet or sometimes longer. In fact, I was in Maui just about a week ago, and on a dive we did at the Molokini crater, the first dive we made there, we saw about a 30-foot whale shark that swam by and sort of said hello. It was pretty impressive, pretty exciting. Now, those 3 largest sharks are sharks that generally are not meat eaters unless they eat something by accident. They're generally filter feeders and feed on plankton. One thing about the sharks is a great white is they have something called counter shading, which is perfect camouflage for a predator like the great white. And if you look at that, looking from below, it's practically invisible. Looking from above, it's practically invisible. So it's a perfect predator for the environment it lives in. Its mouth contains about 3,000 teeth, and it loses teeth regularly. And those teeth are on sort of a conveyor, and they fall off and they're replaced by another tooth. The average great white will lose about 30,000 teeth in a lifetime. And you know, when you think about people who are out there looking for megalodon teeth, and there are a lot of people finding a lot of megalodon teeth, considering the fact that a megalodon could be losing 30,000 teeth in a lifetime, means there are a lot of teeth out there to be found. And of course, you'll see sharks occasionally, which will do this yawning mechanism, and you'll actually see those teeth sort of rotate forward that they would use when they're feeding. And they can eat about 11 tons of food a year, about as much food as I ate during COVID. So they do eat a lot of food. So like all fish, they do have a lateral line, and that lateral line are tubes that are open to the water that help the fish, in this case a great white, detect vibrations in the water. And that way they're able to sense their prey and be able to hone in on it, even if they're in limited visibility water. They also have something called the ampullae of Lorenzini, and these are extremely important sensory perception mechanisms for the great white because they have the ability to detect weak electric currents in the water. And so when you look at the great white, and when you look at this particular photograph, you'll see those lateral scratches on the top of the shark's head. Those are generally from seals. So sometimes when the great white will grab the seal will scratch the head of the great white, and it's not uncommon to see those scratches. So when you see those pores there around the nose of that great white, those are the ampullae of Lorenzini. And those are necessary for hunting because they allow the great white to be able to hunt without being able to see the prey. They can detect and do detect muscle contractions of the prey, so they can tell when the prey is swimming. And one thing that's kind of scary to me is that they possibly can detect the heartbeat of the prey. And when I'm out there seeing them, even in a cage, sometimes my heart will be beating away. So I'm sure they sense the fact that I'm there. They are warm bodied. So unlike other fish, they are warm bodied. Their organs are about 13 degrees warmer than the surrounding water temperature. And that's caused by the fact that their internal organs are warmed by transferring and using muscle heat. So they are a warm-blooded fish. And their fat content is important because they feed upon mammals due to their high fat content, and turn that fat into energy to help them keep their internal organs warm, even in extremely cold water. And their primary prey would be pinnipeds, sea lions, and seals. And when you go to places like Guadalupe, it has a large population of sea lions. In fact, there are a lot of places around the United States and other parts of the world where the sea lion and the pinniped population is growing, and that has attracted great whites to those areas when the great whites were not necessarily there before. Or they're seeing them more frequently, like places, for example, in New England, where they're seeing them more frequently because of the surge in population of pinnipeds. This is a photo of a seal that came out to our boat at Guadalupe, and it was having a look around to see what was going on. And this is a photograph that I took from one of the surface cages looking at another cage. And you can see the great white, and this one has some damage to its fins, but you'll also see a sea lion. And the sea lions, that particular day and in other days where I've seen this happen, they tend to play with the shark. And in fact, this particular seal would actually swim around the shark as the shark is swimming, and it would swim around the shark towards its head, and then it would turn, come back and bite its tail. And then the sea lion would go to the surface and hang on the surface, looking down and watching the shark. Periodically, the shark would turn and go towards the sea lion, but we never saw a shark actually go after a sea lion. It would go up towards the sea lion, and then it would turn to go back down and basically ignore the sea lion. Sea lion or seal would come back down, do the same thing, bite the shark's tail and go up. And it's happened all day long. So they are not necessarily afraid of those sharks. The sharks also, when they go to places like Guadalupe, will feed on other things besides the pinnipeds. For example, in Guadalupe, there are huge populations of yellowfin tuna. And we'll sometimes see hundreds, if not thousands, of yellowfin tuna out there, and the sharks will feed on those as well. So going on with the anatomy of great white eyes, and of course, you hear a lot of things about eyes. I'm going to show you a clip that came from the movie Jaws.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eye.
So he said that the shark's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. And in reality, they're not black at all. They're blue. And so when you look closely at a great white shark's eye, you'll see that blue eye, which will look at you as it's swimming by the cage. It also has a surface on the inside of the eyeball called the tapetum lucidum, which allows light to be reflected back through the lens, which allows them to see a lot better in limited visibility water. So in murky water, for example, the great white will have vision that's 10 times better than humans in clear water. Now, this photo was taken in Gans Bay, South Africa. And one of the difference with Gans Bay is the visibility there is sometimes very, very limited. In fact, on one of the cage dive trips that I was on, visibility was probably only in a matter of inches. We couldn't even see a great white unless it was right up against the shark cage itself. And so we'll talk about visibility changes because in Guadalupe, it's entirely different. And also most sharks have something called a nictitating membrane, which is used to protect their eye when they're feeding. And that's present on most sharks. With great whites, they don't have a nictitating membrane. Their eyes actually roll back in their heads when they're feeding or attacking prey. So those two photos, which I took from the trip to Guadalupe, you'll see that white surface, which is actually the back of their eye because their eyes are rolling back in their head. And here we have a shark that was going up to feed on a piece of bait on the surface. And then when it does, it comes up, it'll be partially airborne and then back in the water. And during that time, its eyes roll back in its head. So it's almost blind when it hits the water again. In this particular case, it swam down between two shark cages that were there on the surface. And also, I'd like you to look at the shark cages that I show you in these photos, because the photos were taken in different years and the shark cages have evolved over the years from a tubular aluminum, round tubular aluminum, which is very, very strong, to what they're using now, which is stainless steel. And the configuration of the cages also have changed, and I'll talk about that too as we're going through. So one of the things that really excites me about going to places like Guadalupe is you have an opportunity not only to see a lot of great white sharks, and sometimes we'll see as many as 6 or 7 at a time, but you also get an opportunity to see their behavior, and their behavior is the way it would be naturally in the wild. And you'll see them, as you see in some of these drawings, you'll see them swimming side by side. You'll see them swimming parallel to each other. You'll see us swimming at each other. You'll see them swimming around each other. You'll see them getting close. You'll see them arch their back, open their mouth. You'll see a lot of things. You'll see them stick their head out of the water. So you'll see all of these things generally during the time you're in a place like Guadalupe, because there's so much shark activity. You'll see all of that behavior. And you'll see them sometimes swimming parallel to each other as they swim up and around a shark cage. So these are two, and what they'll do, they swim parallel to one another. And during that time, they may be sizing each other up to see which one is larger. And generally the larger one tends to be more dominant than the smaller one. And then one will turn away and not interfere. Occasionally that doesn't happen. Occasionally there is a little bit of aggression between the two, but that doesn't happen very often. And in this particular case, you see this shark cage. This shark cage is entirely different. This was taken back in 2015, and it's a different configuration of shark cage, which has a large cage-like structure on the top, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. And occasionally the sharks will want to show aggression to another shark, and they'll do what's called a proximity bite. And that's simply a warning, stay away. And so you'll see a lot of those sharks that have bites in and around their head, on their side, on their tail, and various parts of their body, because another shark has sort of taken offense because they've gotten too close, they've done something, and therefore they've gotten a proximity bite to let them know they shouldn't be there. And also sharks, when they don't know what something is, they will do a test bite. And sometimes they'll do a test bite or a proximity bite on another shark, as you see in this photo. But that test bite of a fish that actually is a very large fish, has a lot of biting pressure, can be devastating. And also they bite when they mate. So generally the male will bite the female in and around the gills and hold her and flip her over so that they can mate. And that can cause some rather dramatic damage to the shark. We've seen damage where literally almost the entire gill structure on one side of the shark is ripped out during some very, very violent mating activity. And then sometimes you'll see them put their head out of the water, which is called spy hopping, the same thing that whales do. And they don't know exactly why they do that. They may be looking to see what's up there. They may be using that to smell the air. Nobody really knows, but it's not uncommon to see them stick their head out of the water. Breaching, and sharks do breach. This was a photo taken, I didn't take this photo, but one that was taken in South Africa, in a very popular place where they do have those breaching sharks. Most of those breaching sharks are gone now because a pod or a number of pods of killer whales moved in and chased a lot of the great whites away. So you won't see that kind of activity in certain places in South Africa any longer. And I'm going to show you now a video, as far as I know, is the first video ever taken of a great white breaching. For the video was taken from underwater. So you see an underwater view. Shark, you'll see it kind of shake, off it goes. And then splashes back down in the water and then swims away. So nobody knows exactly why sharks do that. Nobody knows. There may be some sort of display, maybe some aggressive display to use some energy. It may be, who knows? But the shark was not after anything, just decided to breach. Now, when they attack their prey, there are sharks that attack directly on, so they'll be swimming below the surface, go directly at their prey, or if the prey is deep underwater, go directly at the prey. There are also what are called ambush predators that will actually lurk down below, either below the boat or down in deeper water. And when they see the silhouette of something that they feel is a prey item, then they go rocketing up to the surface. So it's not uncommon to be in a cage down below the surface and see a great white rocketing to the surface after what it would consider as prey. And when they do, they got their eyes fixed on whatever they think the prey item is on the surface. And in this particular case, they're actually after some tuna that's floating on the surface. But attacks on humans, as we talked about, are very, very rare. And most often it's mistaken identity. So when the shark, especially an ambush predator, is down below, they look to the surface, they see a silhouette, and you see somebody on a surfboard or a boogie board or something. And to them, that may have the appearance of a pinniped of some sort, a seal or a sea lion or an elephant seal. And so they'll go at it. And so they do a test bite. And a lot of times they do that test bite. That test bite, of course, is due to mistaken identity. And the test bite could be a biting pressure of about 4,000 pounds per square inch. And that, of course, can be devastating to the animal because it can take off a limb. And generally speaking, the death is by massive blood loss or exsanguination. So it might have been a test bite because they weren't sure what it was. They weren't sure if it was their prey item. And a lot of times, once they realize that it's not the prey item they were expecting, they will let go. But of course, sometimes that test bite can have devastating results. So humans are never intentionally on the great white's menu. Their primary prey items or food source are seals, sea lions, elephant seals, sea otters, turtles, dolphins, smaller sharks, tuna, carrion. They eat just about everything. And so humans are only on that menu purely by accident. So when you look at the distribution, they actually have a worldwide distribution. So all the areas there in red are areas where great whites have been found. Now, there are areas there where they're more frequently seen, and those are the areas that are very popular for seeing great whites. For example, like South Africa, as I mentioned, South Australia, they're very, very common there. And of course, Guadalupe Island, Mexico, and all up the west coast of the United States, they're not uncommon to see them. And when they migrate, they do sometimes migrate long distances. So they did tag a number of great whites, and they continue with this tagging program where they can see where they go and how long it takes them to go from one place to the next and their general behavior. And there were sharks that were tagged that went from the coast of California out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean between California and Hawaii. And the sharks from Guadalupe will do the same thing. They'll go out to this, what they call the white shark migration area. And it's also known as the Great White Cafe. And it is very common for sharks to migrate out there and spend some time out there, even though no one knows exactly why they do that. There's really nothing out there. There isn't any major food source out there. There's no underwater structures out there. It's simply an area in the middle of the Pacific where these sharks congregate for a period of time. And after they congregate there, some will go back to the coast of California, some to Guadalupe, some on to Hawaii, some to other places. And they don't necessarily always go back to the same place either. So they do a lot of migration. The longest migration ever recorded was one that was actually tagged initially in November of 2003. It surfaced again in February of 2004, and then it disappeared again and surfaced back in southern Africa in August of 2004. And it swam a total of 11,000 kilometers in 99 days. I mean, that is absolutely incredible. And nobody knows why they do that. It simply migrated and swam that distance over that period of time. Also, there was an orca that killed a great white off the Farallon Islands in the year 2000. And the smell or the odor of that dead shark's carcass caused all the great whites to vanish from the area. One shark that was tagged actually immediately dived to a depth of 500 meters and swam nonstop to Hawaii. Nobody knows why. And so great whites are sometimes a prey item from killer whales because a killer whale wants to eat their liver. And so they'll rip the killer whale open, take the liver, and leave the rest to rot. Now, let's talk about Guadalupe Island, Mexico. Okay, Guadalupe Island is 220 nautical miles southeast of Ensenada, Mexico. And when most of the dive operators go to Guadalupe, they will leave from Ensenada, Mexico. There are some that leave from San Diego, but there are majority of them will leave directly from Ensenada and go directly to Guadalupe. And you leave in the evening and you arrive at the early evening the next day at Guadalupe Island, Mexico. And it is a Mexican biosphere, so it's a protected area. And when you look at it, it's a large enough island to be able to create its own weather. And when you look at it here, it's a very mountainous volcanic island. It's 94 square miles, 22 miles long, and almost 6 miles wide at its widest. And it has the highest point is over 4,000 feet. So the area where I pointed there with the arrow is the anchorage area called Spanish Cove. Now, Spanish Cove is where all of the boats anchor. It is a protected cove because the wind, the prevailing wind normally comes from the west. And so it's not uncommon to see these dive operators anchor their boats. Sometimes 3, 4, or 5 boats are anchored there simultaneously. And they're there sometimes within a quarter mile or half a mile of the shore. And the sharks simply swim up and down that area. There is on the other side of the island a fishing village, and the fishermen over there will actually dive and collect sea urchins and abalone and a few others, and they have never been bothered by great whites ever, at least from everything they tell to the people who are doing any research out there. There is a shark biologist who spends a lot of time on the island who goes out and is involved in the tagging program there, but this is where the boats will anchor. I go there because I support the Historical Diving Society, and they do an annual fundraiser there. And the majority of trips I've done are trips as part of the Historical Diving Society's annual fundraising program. And they do that, and it's sponsored by Ed Stetson, and Ed Stetson from Stetson Diving. He donates the proceeds from these fundraisers to support the Diving History Journal, the Journal of Diving History. So this is one of my favorite photos because when you look at that tip of land to the right, looks just like a shark fin. And so when you arrive at the island, it's generally covered with mist, and the first thing you see is this tip of land that looks like a shark fin out there just off the shore. And this is a video that was made by Nautilus on one of the trips that we were on. This is a video that they give to all the people that are on that trip. And some of the photos here are photos the guests have taken.
Because you look so fine that I really want to make you mine. So fine that I really want to make you mine. 4, 5, 6, come on and get your kicks. Now you don't need the money when you look like that, do you, honey? Big black bones, long brown hair. She's so sweet. Get a backstab. Like I say, you are with me. That's you are with me. I know we ain't got much to say before I let you get away. I said, are you gonna be my girl?
Okay. Yeah, that was a trip we did last year. Actually, most of the guys on that particular trip were guys from the U.S. Navy. In fact, my cage buddy on that trip was President Biden's personal physician. In fact, the first night we were out on site, the president actually called the boat, and the captain was sitting up on the bridge, and the satellite phone rang, and the captain said hello, and the guy on the other end said hello, and the captain said, well, who is this? And the guy said, well, this is Joe Biden, and the captain said, oh yeah, right, who is it really? And it was the president who was calling to check in on his doctor who was doing the cage diving there with us. But the trips that I do are generally with the Nautilus liveaboards, and the last trip I was on the Nautilus Bellamy, which is a very, very large boat, 140 feet long, and you can see the huge dive deck there on the back.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Yeah, that was the iconic statement, you're going to need a bigger boat. And by the way, that statement was actually ad-libbed. So Roy Scheider that was not part of the script. And what happened was during the filming, they kept joking around about the boat and the fact it should be a bigger boat because they're dealing with a big shark. And so when it came time for him to say something, he simply said what they'd been joking about was you need a bigger boat. So the Nautilus Bellamy has 5 shark cages. Other boats have other configurations. Other boats from Nautilus have other configurations, but the Bellamy, being as large as it is, has 5 cages, 3 are submersible, and 2 are fixed on the surface. So you can see there's a starboard and a port and a center submersible cage that go down to a depth of 24 feet. Then you have 2 surface cages that are fixed on the surface. And the way this whole thing works, everyone is assigned at least 3 submersible cage dives a day. One of them is in starboard cage, one is in the center cage, one is in the port cage. So everybody is guaranteed 3 of those submersible cage trips every day. And then the surface cages are open on a first come, first served basis. And you can stay in there as long as you want, as long as there aren't people waiting in line to get in behind you. So one thing about Guadalupe, it has the largest identified population of great white sharks in the world. There have been well over 320 identified great whites. And generally when they're identified, they are given a name. There is something called the Great White ID Project. And that is something that was started by the boats that go out to Guadalupe, and they will take photographs and they will record the name of that particular shark and keep a record of that in this book that all of the boats have. And one of the things generally guests do is when they see a shark, they can try to identify it in the book to see if it's been identified before. If it has never been identified and they have photographs of both sides of that shark, then they get the opportunity to name that shark. And what they do on these trips is they have one of the crew who's an expert in shark biology. We'll talk about the Shark ID Project and talk about all of the natural history of the great white sharks. And this is a copy of the book. And so this is from 2014. And since then, there have been a lot of additional sharks added to this shark book. And one thing they do is they want you to identify the shark, first of all, just to know if it's a male or female. And we talked about earlier, males have those extensions of the pelvic fin that are called claspers that are used for mating, and females don't, of course, have that. And so one of the things, the first thing you do is to identify whether that shark is a male or female. And then you look at certain features, because sharks have certain features that do not change over time. Sometimes there are some serious markings that you'll see on the dorsal fin and the caudal fin. If it is something that is damage or an injury, that will heal and go away. But there are other marks, for example, like near the gill slits and also near the pelvic fin, that are marks that stay with that shark and do not change over time and are with the shark the entire life. But as you see, there are some marks on the shark's skin, and those things will heal over time and disappear. Other things you look for are those ridges in the coloration on the sides, both close to the head and forward of the gills, as well as along the side. Those marks do not change and are also helpful in identifying the shark. Some of the ones that have been identified that we've seen are Kendrick. Kendrick is the one that I took a photograph of back in 2013, and that, in fact, that's used in their advertising for Guadalupe and for Nautilus. Shredder was named Shredder because of the shredded fin that it has, but sometimes it's just a name that somebody comes up with. Lucy was named because somebody liked the name Lucy, but one thing that's iconic about her is she has a broken tail fin. And so it simply flops back and forth when she's swimming, and she's been around for a long, long time, and she's seen regularly on trips out to Guadalupe. Bruce is a massive, massive shark. I mean, you can see how big that shark is. The girth is just unbelievable. And then Big Blue, of course, is that one that's at least 20 feet long that has been seen out there periodically. It's not been seen out there the last couple of years that I've gone out there, but it still is seen periodically. This is one that I really seriously wanted to name. This was a shark I saw 2 years ago that had a broken caudal fin, or excuse me, broken pelvic fin, or excuse me, broken pectoral fin. And so it kept coming to the cage. And so I got photographs of its head. I got photographs of the one side, and I was not ever able to take photographs of both sides. So the guy who was my cage buddy on most of the cage dives I did, a physician named Steve Jenkins, he was actually able to get photos of both sides. So he had the opportunity to name this shark, and he gave it that name, which is the bunny name for some reason or other. I actually picked out a name. I was going to call it Corsair because to me it looked just like a World War II Corsair aircraft. Here's another shark we photographed. It's got a really unusual tip on its caudal fin and unusual markings there at the base of the caudal fin. And you have sharks like this that have some damage. This one actually has a tumor that's located on the dorsal fin, and the dorsal fin actually had some damage, and it's likely to heal over time, so it's not likely to be there. And of course, there is some damage there in the hindquarters there of the great white that was caused by either a test bite or a proximity bite. And of course, that's going to heal and disappear over time. Now, a lot of times we go out there, and it's not just to see the sharks, but it's actually to collect some data. And this was a trip we did in 2015 where we had a shark biologist with us who wanted to measure the sharks that we were seeing. And she did that by a device that she created that had 2 laser pointers. You can see it up there, and she's there on the cage on the right-hand side. And so those 2 laser pointers pointed dots on the shark's side. She had a video, a GoPro actually, to record a photo of that shark. And she knew the distance between the 2 laser dots and was able to then calculate the size of the great white shark. And then in 2016, we had a couple of people on board, Dre Stockard, and we had Dan Stetson, who were there to actually do a live streaming video program, not only from Guadalupe, but from inside the cage. And that was something that was broadcast in both English and Spanish, and it was sent out to selective school systems by satellite. And it was supported by a generous grant from the Nicholas Foundation. And it was actually fantastic. Unfortunately, it's difficult to do live streaming when you're that remote, but some of the school systems were actually able to log on and be able to hear the presentation done by a shark biologist, Chris Lowe, who was actually in the shark cage doing his broadcast in English. And then they had another person who was in there doing the same broadcast in Spanish. And in fact, he even has a little shark in his hand showing shark movement, when of course there's sharks all around. But it was a fantastic thing, and we hope to be able to recreate that sometime in the future because it's a fantastic opportunity. And the idea was that students would actually be able to ask questions to the shark biologist inside the cage with sharks around them in Guadalupe. So visibility there is unique because I talked about when you go to Gans Bay in South Africa, visibility is generally relatively poor. The best visibility I've ever seen there is probably 15 to 20 feet. In Guadalupe, it's consistently 50 feet or more. In fact, on most occasions, you can be in the cage at the stern of a boat like the Bellamy and count the anchor lengths 140 feet away. So the visibility is phenomenal. It's not always that way, but the majority of time it is that way. And so you're not going to find any place else in the world with visibility that's consistently that good. And you can see this photograph taken from one of the submerged shark cages up towards the surface, and we have exceptional visibility. Water temperature there are between 68 and 74. When I first started going there in 2008, it was consistently around 68 degrees. It has been getting progressively a little warmer. So it's not really warm water by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not exceptionally cold either. And it is tolerable, and you can, with the proper exposure suit, spend a lot of time in the water watching these sharks. In fact, when I go, I wear a dry suit because I'm in the water as much as I can be. In fact, on one particular trip, I was actually able to make 27 separate cage dives to watch these great whites. The diving season is normally from July to late November or early December. And in the summer months, July, August, and September, what they had traditionally seen were mainly males. And males are still good sized sharks, 12 to 14 feet. And in October, they were seeing later in the year, October and November, sometimes early December, they were seeing some males, but mainly females, which are much, much larger. And a lot of those females are pregnant. So the girth is just phenomenal. But that is not necessarily the way it's continuing to be, because the last trip I made in mid-October, we were actually seeing majority of males and very few females. So you can see a female like this. This is a very, very large, probably very pregnant, huge girth female great white shark, around 14 feet long. And you can see she's got a satellite tag. There has been a tagging program going on there for years. And actually some of the tagging was done by a group of free divers, believe it or not. And we actually had dinner with those free divers one time we were out there, and they were talking about some of the sharks they'd seen. And they said they'd seen one that they thought was well over 20 feet long. And another shark, you can see this one also is huge. I mean, they're just massive, massive sharks. And you really never know which one you're going to see, and you never know how many you're going to see. So it's always an exciting opportunity to go out there. One of the things they do before you actually get on site is do a lecture on cage diving, because you have to know the do's and don'ts of what you can and cannot do when you're in a cage. The cages they're using now are all stainless steel, as compared to the tubular aluminum that they were using before, but they were all very, very strong, very custom made, and therefore not likely to have a problem with a shark getting into the cage. And you can see here, there are some on the surface, some below, depending upon the boat. This actually happened to be the Nautilus Explorer. The Explorer is a little smaller, so it does not have 5 cages. It only has 4. When you look at the cages, one of the questions that people always ask are, well, what about the breathing gas supply? Well, you're breathing surface applied gas. So you have a hose that comes down from the surface. So literally you have unlimited breathing gas. If something were to happen, and it doesn't happen, but if something were to happen where you would lose that breathing gas supply from the surface, you have an onboard breathing gas, emergency breathing gas supply. And you also have an independent ballast system. So even though the cage is lowered down into the water from the surface, from the boat by a crane, you do have a totally independent emergency ballast system that it can be operated by the crew member who is in the cage with you. They can operate that. They can also immediately operate and turn on the breathing gas supply, so you'll never know there was any interruption in breathing gas supply. You also have safety cylinders inside each one of the cages. So you have 2, you have 1 on each corner. They have an octopus there, so you have 2 regulators per cylinder. You also have a inflator hose that you can use for your dry suit. And when I wear a dry suit, when I go down to 24 feet in the cage, to keep from having suit squeeze, I'll hook into the regulator and the cylinder and put a little bit of air in my dry suit, so I don't have to worry about suit squeeze. So these cages can be totally independent if necessary. And each diver wears a weight harness that has between 30 and 45 pounds, because you want to be as heavy as you can be to be stable on the bottom. Because again, you are in the ocean, and even though you're in a protected area, there are sometimes some wave action that comes through, and you could be bouncing around, especially in the surface cages, and you want to make sure you're as heavy as possible. Oh, let me go back to that for a minute. And even though you may be wearing a heavy weight harness, if you don't want to put that on the deck and walk down the ladder into the cage, the crew members will actually put it on you in the water and take it off of you in the water, which is a service they provide. So the rules and requirements are established by the Mexican Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. And so they are the ones that dictate what you can and cannot do on site. And occasionally there are some rules that change. They do change periodically. When I first started going there, all of the cages were on the surface. After that, they did permit some cages to go below the surface, initially down to 30 feet. Then they decided that it had to be at 25 feet. Now it's at 24 feet. They dictate what you can and cannot do. And sometimes those changes do delay some of the beginning of the season going to Guadalupe. And in fact, there is some going on right now where there may be a slight delay this year because of some changes that may be taking place. But the rules as they stand right now is the maximum depth of a submersible cage can be no greater than 24 feet. And don't ask me why they selected 24 feet. That's just what they selected. No diving can be done outside the cages. Early on, there was some diving permitted. You get a special permit to dive outside the cage. Can't do that any longer. So no diving is permitted outside the cages. No body parts are allowed outside the cages. So you can't have any of your body sticking outside the cage. Cameras and strobes have to stay within the cage as well. So nothing can be outside of the cage. And no noise can be generated from the cage. So you can't beat on the bars, you can't stamp your feet, you can't take any food to attract sharks inside the cage. So you can't do any of that. There are some things they do permit to attract the sharks to the boat. When you look at this particular photo, this is actually an older cage that was used back in the early part of the 2000s. And there they were made of tubular aluminum. The openings to allow photographers to stick their cameras out was much larger. And they even allowed people to stand on the top of the cage if you wanted to. And in fact, when I took a group there a number of years ago, that's exactly what we did. We actually were on top of the cage where you were taking photos of the shark from the top of the cage. I actually did a fundraiser for Divers Alert Network when I was the president of DAN. And we actually, as part of that fundraiser, took a wounded Iraq War veteran, Sergeant Orlando Gill. And Sergeant Gill, that's him standing on the cage. You can see he lost his lower right leg in Iraq and he has his prosthesis there. And he's standing along with other photographers on the top of the cage. They no longer allow that to take place. They used to allow you to hang out of the cage if you wanted to take a picture. Can't do that any longer. This is a video. Let me stop this for a second. This is a video that was taken of me. And it's a photograph. I was actually taking a photograph of the shark. And when I took a photograph of the shark had its mouth open. That's Kendrick actually. And after I took the photo, the shark bait, because they were actually attracting the shark from the cage itself, the shark bait went by and I looked at the bait. I turned back and put my eye in the viewfinder to look at the shark again, and you'll see what happens. So there's the bait that's going up, and I took the picture of the shark. I'm actually now looking at the bait going by, and then I look into the viewfinder of my camera just when my camera goes into the shark's mouth. And there, actually, let me go back for a second there. There was a bubble that was exhausted when I did that, and there was a word in that bubble that I won't mention in public. And this is actually a screen grab from a video that someone else took in the cage of my camera actually in the shark's mouth. So that's another reason why they don't allow any of your body parts nor your cameras outside the shark cage, because the sharks can come very, very close to the cage itself. So one thing they do is they allow something, and this is allowed by permit by the Mexican government. They do allow something called wrangling. And wrangling is where they have two platforms at the corners of the dive deck on each boat. And there's a crew member who stands on that platform and throws a piece of frozen tuna out into the water, and the sharks can come up and take the tuna. They try not to feed the sharks. The purpose is not to feed the shark. The purpose is just to bring the shark in to the surface so people can see them and photograph them. And what they use are frozen pieces of tuna that they buy from local fishermen to support the local economy. And the sharks, the tuna is actually attached to a line using sisal, which is a very, very, is not so strong twine that is biodegradable. And so sometimes the shark are quicker than the crew member and do get the piece of tuna. This particular shark did. And sometimes the sharks will come to the surface. And in fact, in this case, I couldn't tell whether the shark was actually after the tuna or after the seagull, but he did miss the seagull. And you can see his eye, that eyeball is actually in the process now of rolling back in the back of its head. And so the sharks will come to the surface and will go after the tuna. Most often they miss the tuna, sometimes they get it. And sometimes they actually are ambush predators are coming down from below. So sometimes you'll see that shark go rocketing towards the surface after that piece of tuna. And sometimes they'll actually breach, and their head and even the other parts of their body will be out of the water. Here's one that I took a photograph of. I was actually standing on the stern. So there are photo opportunities whether you're in the cages or not. I was standing on the stern, and during the first hour that we were on site and people were in the cages, there were 7 separate breaches. So it's something that happens relatively frequently. And this is a large, large shark. And you can see its eye, that white piece is its eye rolled back in its head. And this shark came completely out of the water. And this is about a 2,000-pound shark. And another one actually breached shortly after that. And here's one that actually came up to the surface, actually after a piece of tuna that was on the surface. See another one, And a lot of times you'll find that there are bait fish there because the boat becomes almost like an artificial reef. And there are a lot of bait fish that congregate underneath the boat. And sometimes it's difficult not only to see the other cages, but sometimes to see the sharks without a fish being in the way. And the sharks will come very, very close to the cages. So whether you're on the surface cage or down below, you have great photo opportunities and great opportunities to see the behavior of these sharks. Now, this is a very interesting photo. This is about a 14-foot great white, and it's literally right up against the cage. And look at the diver. The diver's actually facing the wrong direction. The diver never saw that shark. So you need to make sure that you are constantly looking around you because you never know what direction the sharks are going to come from. And you also notice there's only one person in that cage. And this is not uncommon. So most often when you're there, you're on site for 3 days. And when you're there, everybody wants to get in the water the first day. By the second day, people have all seen sharks. Sometimes they're not as enthusiastic about getting back in the water and they want to either take pictures on the surface or they want to just enjoy the sunshine. And so it's not uncommon for those cages to have very few people in them. And so that's one reason why I'm always ready and always with my suit on, ready to take a place that's open. And you sometimes see more than one. At one time, we actually did see 7 sharks at one time. And they do come directly at the cages. And sometimes they pay no attention whatsoever to the bait. They're just cruising around, looking at the cages and looking at the boat. And here we have 2 that were initially side by side, sort of sizing each other up. And then they split and went to different directions. And also when you see these photos, I mean, look at all the different markings because each shark is marked differently. Here's one that it came by and gave us a nice look. And actually this one spent a lot of time by the cages. Here's one that also paid no attention to the bait, was just actually cruising in front of the cages for some great photo opportunities. And you get really some spectacular photo opportunities because sometimes you'll see that dappled appearance of the sunlight and the wave action above. And you can see perfectly that counter shading of the great white shark, making it virtually invisible from down below and virtually invisible from looking from the top. And they will come close, so you do have great photo opportunities, even though you can't have your camera or any other part of your body outside the cages. And sometimes, again, you may not be looking, and all of a sudden out of the corner of your eye, you'll see something, and the sharks are right there very close to the cage. Here's one that actually stuck its pectoral fin. Now you can see the girth of that shark. I mean, that is a huge, huge shark. And so you have people who are taking photos from down below and also from the surface cages. And here we have 2 that are in mid-water, and one of them actually has a missing lower portion of the caudal fin. And again, we have only one person in that cage besides the cage operator, the crew member, because it was probably the 3rd day and some people just simply didn't want to take the time to get in the cage. But I'll tell you, every opportunity I have, I'm in the cage. Here we have 2, and you have a number of people in the shark cage back behind. Here you have 2, you see one that's got scars on its side, probably from mating. There are 3 sharks there, and you have that one that lost the lower portion of its caudal fin. This was actually one of the first photos I ever took in Guadalupe, and this was a shark that came directly at the cage. And actually, that hand belongs to Bob Hollis, who is the inventor of Oceanic. And Bob and I were in the cage at the same time. I simply took the photo over his shoulder. And that's Bob again. And the shark came in real close, actually rubbed its belly on the side of the cage. And the guy in the photo there is Leslie Linney from the Historical Diving Society. And he's in a submersible cage. And the sharks were down, just circling the cage, and there were no food down there because they don't allow feeding or any kind of attractant from the cages any longer. So the sharks are just curious, wanted to see what was going on. And here's one too, that's actually looking at the cage. Another one where you have a lot of photographers, and a lot of people are using sophisticated cameras. Some are using GoPros. And in fact, one of the things we always talk about is if you want to find probably the world's largest accumulation of GoPros, you go down to the bottom below where these boats anchor, because there are a lot of people that have lost their GoPros down there. Here's one that has a huge bite on the side of its head, probably a proximity bite from another shark that said, hey, you're a bit too close. Here's one that's coming at the cage. You can see the wide part of their tail. That's the keel we talked about earlier. And here's one that was coming towards us, getting in very close. So again, a lot of great photo opportunities. And you can see the eye. The eye is there looking at you as it swims by. And you can see the side. Let me go back a minute. You'll see another one. But you see that crescent-shaped mark on the side right below the dorsal fin. that's actually a rope mark. Because sometimes these sharks will get entangled in ropes that are used for mooring buoys that some of the fishermen use. And there's one with some bites actually on its side and near the gills. They could be from some mating attempts. And here's another one that has that crescent mark from rope. And we actually had one a couple of years ago that had some rope still attached to it, and we did our best. And I think we finally were able to get the rope to the point where it would break loose very easily and try to remove that from the shark. And again, you have ambush predators, so you never know whether you should be looking straight ahead or up or down. So always be prepared when you're out there, because you never know what direction the sharks are going to come from. Here's one coming from down below towards the surface. Another, and you can see how slick and beautiful. I mean, that's an absolutely gorgeous shark. That dappled sunshine on the surface. Here's another one with the proximity where this one actually was one of the most curious sharks we'd ever seen. It probably stayed with us for almost the entire day. And whether you were on the surface or down below in the submersible cages, that shark would come down and swim around and look and just see what was going on. So my basic philosophy is that the sharks are calling and I must go. So anytime I'm given an opportunity to go out there to Guadalupe, I am on my way. So I want to thank you very much for participating in this webinar. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person to see everyone, but I'd also like to thank the Diving History Museum because they do a fantastic job, and I'm proud to say that I am a member and I am a supporter of the museum. So any questions, and as Lisa mentioned, I'll hang around as long as you want me to answer any questions. And if you'd like to email me any question about almost anything, my email address is danorr@danorrconsulting.com, and I will answer any questions you may have. So again, thank you all very much. Okay, I'm stopping the share. Well, it's good to see you all. Okay, I guess they're going to answer questions that were submitted in the chat room. Is that right, Julia? Or Lisa? Or somebody?
Yes, so we already have one question in the chat. Elizabeth
Okay.
wants to know, what are the skill requirements for diving?
Okay, what are the skill requirements for diving in Guadalupe? There really are none. If you are a non-certified, you are allowed to go in the surface cages only. So there are some people who are not certified, because in a surface cage, you're literally only under a couple of feet of water. So you're breathing from a regulator, but you're not wearing fins. You're only wearing a mask, an exposure suit, and that weight belt. And they will give you a complete orientation on board the boat. And there'll be somebody watching you at all times. But there are people who are not certified who can stay in the surface cages only. To go in the submerged cages, you simply have to be a certified diver. No skill levels required, because again, you're not doing any swimming. You're just simply standing there and watching all of these sharks.
Okay, I have another question. What is the typical cost of one of these trips?
That's a good question. The different operators have different costs. They can be anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000. And that covers your transportation from wherever the meeting point happens to be. If it is places, groups like Nautilus or the other operators that go to Ensenada, you're picked up in San Diego, you're taken by bus or van to Ensenada, you are then transferred to the boats, and once you're on board the boat, it covers your accommodations and your meals, and the meals are phenomenal. The staterooms are very, very comfortable. They have a number of different levels of staterooms, and sometimes the ones, of course, that are higher end are much more expensive. But generally around $35,000 to $4,000 would be the cost. And to me, to see an apex predator like a great white, essentially in its natural habitat, and watching that behavior never gets old. And that's one reason why whenever I'm finished with 1 year, I immediately sign up for the trips for the next year.
Okay, this one's a two-part question. One is, what cameras do you recommend for underwater photography? And do you have any basic underwater photo tips? Your photos are jaw-dropping.
Well, thank you for that. And you've only seen a few out of the hundreds of thousands that I've taken, but I've actually used two different cameras. the camera I've used to take these photographs that you saw was actually a lower end Canon. It was a Canon 80D in an Icolite housing. Most of the people that I've seen there will use much more sophisticated cameras in much more expensive housings. I did recently get a Canon R5, which is a mirrorless camera, and I'm pretty confident that I'm going to put it in a housing and take it on the next trip that I go on. I've never used it underwater before, but I've also used a Canon G7X in a fantasy housing, which is also a less expensive, almost like a pocket camera, and it takes phenomenal photos. The one thing that I haven't done that I really should have done is do video, because a lot of people that go there do video, and video really shows the behavior of these sharks and their beauty in the water and their movement in the water and how fluid they are. But I've not done that because I really am not that experienced with video. But there are a lot of different cameras, and a lot of people, in fact, on the last trip I was on, in fact, the one video you saw that was done by Nautilus, if you were to watch the whole thing, probably 80% of the photos were mine, because a lot of people didn't even bring a camera. And on another trip I was on, I was the only one that had a camera other than a GoPro. So GoPros are very common because you get good video, you get good stills from a GoPro. And so I would say probably the majority of people that go there are using GoPros. And I don't consider myself a professional photographer, but I'm comfortable with the cameras that I use. I don't use strobes, partly because, in my opinion, the water is so clear, and a lot of the photos I take, you're relatively close to the water, so you have to the surface of the water, so you have a lot of available light. And to me, the strobe just simply gets in the way. So almost all the photos that I've taken are without a strobe.
Okay. I have another question from someone who is here in person. Do sharks ever bite the cages?
There have been occasions where the shark, when it went up towards a tuna and it partially breached and went back in the water, as we mentioned earlier, was partially blind and it didn't know where to go. And so in at least one occasion that I'm aware of, it actually came right at the cage and bumped into the cage. It didn't intentionally bite the cage, but there are instances that I've seen with videos from other operators where the shark actually, when it went back in the water, its mouth was open and its mouth went at the cage, but it didn't intentionally bite the cage. Years ago, when the openings were much larger, I am aware of a situation where the shark's nose went in through the opening and the nose actually hit somebody in the leg and bruised their leg, didn't bite them because it wasn't that far into the cage. And there are situations where, especially with older cages where you have a much larger opening, some of the shark got into the cage and couldn't come back out. I mean, there is a video that was circulating where one actually got its head stuck in a cage, and sharks don't have reverse. And so it was kind of flopping around, and actually that shark injured itself in that process. So they've since reduced the openings to protect the sharks and also to help protect the guests a lot better.
Okay.
First time I went out there, I actually thought the sharks were going to do that they were going to start biting the cages, and they really don't do that.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. So this person is asking, an orca whale was recently sighted off the coast of Cape Cod. They want to know, is it possible that migratory patterns are changing, and if orcas pose a threat to the Cape Cod white shark population?
Well, I think because of the environmental changes and climate change, I think the migration patterns are obviously absolutely changing. In fact, when we first started going to Guadalupe, the only thing we ever saw were great white sharks. Saw nothing else other than the sea lions. So we saw no other fish other than the bait fish that were there. The last couple of times we started seeing some barracuda that we hadn't seen before. We started seeing more turtles that we had not seen before. We started seeing, actually they've seen gray whales out there that they hadn't seen before. So I think those migration patterns are changing. And I think when killer whales do come into an area, one of the things we talked about before is that they can prey on great white sharks, and that can certainly affect the great white shark population. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you. Great presentation.
It was awesome.
Stunning
Yeah.
images. Dan, I'm so excited because in October, when we go, this will be my first trip to Guadalupe and for the Great White. So I can't wait.
You're going to
And,
love it. You are going to love it.
When I was in Socorro last month, I was speaking on the Nautilus, one of the captains, and they were saying that all the Nautilus charters are booked solid for Guadalupe this year.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
and-
it's a very popular place to go, and that's the reason I'm going back 2 more times, and I've done it a couple times where I've done 3 back-to-back trips because I personally can't get enough of it.
Yeah, and I put it on the chat line there that Nancy and I booked the Nautilus Explorer for October 6th till the 11th, and we still have a couple of openings. So if anybody is interested, we'd love to have you join us too. But I can't wait to go. This is
If I would strongly suggest people sign into that trip because it's I think a life-changing experience. I mean, I from the first time I was there, I was hooked. I mean, I had to come back. There was no choice.
Now, I was always curious. Now, do the sharks still come back after they, if I'm down there and these big sharks are coming, will they still come close? And even though there's that big cloud of brown.
Well, yeah, and occasionally, actually, and we don't talk about this, but occasionally there is a cloud of itself that's actually comes from the shark. And believe me, it's impressive. Because we were actually doing a video one time and a shark came by and let out this huge brown cloud and it went right through the cage while the guy was in there being videoed. So it was, and I'm not going to show, but it's amazing.
Well, they
All
say
right,
it's
well,
good.
thank you, everybody, for attending. I want to thank Dan Orr for your, being with us today. As you had mentioned, you and Betty are members of the History of Diving Museum. And as a thank you, we've extended that for another year. So
Well, thank you.
362 days a year, you can come to the History of Diving Museum and see what we have here.
Yeah, thank you. And again, anybody can contact me anytime. My email address again is danorr@danorrconsulting.com. And I'd love to hear from you.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks.
Dan.
And as I
Take care,
mentioned,
everybody.
I put a note in the chat that we've recorded this and we'll put it on our YouTube channel tomorrow.
Great. Well, thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.
Have a
Take
nice
care.
night.
Thank you
Bye.
very much, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.